I was a member of the Sullivanians from 1973 to 1979. My involvement inextricably altered my life, and this hour-and-a-half podcast tells the events of my life and chronicles my involvement and the aftermath. The collapse of the group has been documented before in several news and magazine articles, a dissertation, and most recently a book, but never a first-person accounting, and this is what you will hear on this podcast. An artist since I was a child, later earning a master's from Brooklyn College with a passion for writing poetry, the genesis of this podcast began over 10 years ago when I wrote a memoir. Years passed as I tried to shop the book, but couldn't find neither an agent nor a publisher. The book languished on my computer, and then, with the advent of iMovie, I used my memoir as the scaffolding for a documentary that became an official selection of New Filmmakers New York 2020 and a Spotlight Documentary Bronze Award winner 2020 for artistic merit. When this creative journey began, the Sullivanians were largely forgotten, except perhaps by the several hundred former members, 500 at its zenith, many of whom, like myself, survived the control wrought by the Institute and therapists that 40 years later still resonate and begs to be heard. The full documentary can be seen on my YouTube channel, Shell Fine One. Thank you. After being thrown out of the apartment by Annie, the move upstairs to my new apartment was a simple elevator-filled ride away. But emotionally, I was more convinced than ever that there was no place for me in the group. I could no longer toe the party line. A flyer taped to the college community bulletin board brought me to the Open Union and to Chris Crenshaw, who became my way out of the group. I mentioned Chris in episode 4, which covered Jonestown and the group's exodus to Florida, which might be worth a re-listen. But in this episode and the next, I will take a deeper dive into that relationship and how it led me to leave the group and the Sullivanians. The Open Union was located on the second floor of a loft building just west of Fifth Avenue on 19th Street. A single dusty bulb lit the dim stairwell, barely illuminating the Open Union's mission statement that was hand calligraphied on a large poster board. It read, "The Open Union is an independent socialist education center that provides space for a variety of political and cultural active groups to meet. Our collective is open. For us, the content of political education is liberation. We actively support people's struggles to confront and contest common situations of oppression through collective study and action. We organize classes, lectures, workshops, and study groups." It went on. I opened the heavy metal door, and darkness gave way to an melange of wondrous cooking aromas. Following my nose, I turned to see a middle-aged man, long hair in a ponytail, with a frilly white apron around his waist, looking more like Donna Reed than a political activist, busily shifting pots and pans from one hot plate to another. To my right, there was a small auditorium with folding chairs stacked haphazardly against the wall. The casement windows were cranked open, and the faded beige walls were covered with a panoply of political posters. Don't mourn, organize, ban the bomb, power to the people, Black Power, which fluttered in the cool breeze. I followed the wall of posters to a small room where a bespectacled, dark-haired woman was reading a copy of The Nation. She introduced herself as Mary Shelton, whose green, agate eyes shone bright behind heavy tortoise frames in an otherwise plain face. There's a collective meeting in an hour if you'd like to learn more, and you can wait, she said. That's Len out there. He's a great cook, and it's free. Just donate what you can. I stayed for the meeting and the tofu vegetable stir-fry with rice, and joined the collective that night, signing up to teach drawing from the model. Members were responsible for generating revenue, teaching classes, fundraising, and general upkeep. They also rotated weekend responsibilities, opening the doors by 10 a.m., setting out chairs, and making coffee. When my name came up in the rotation a month later, I woke early, cruel and unusual punishment for someone who loves to sleep in as much as I do, quickly dressed and leaving my roommates asleep in their beds. I arrived a little after 8 a.m., and inserted the key into the deadbolt, but it wouldn't turn and became jammed in the lock, the rusty chain dangling like a snake playing possum. The Saturday morning regulars would be arriving soon, wanting their coffee, and I needed to get the door open. I had the collective's telephone list in my knapsack, and moments later I was smoothing the crumpled papers with my fingertips, scanning the names. Christopher Crenshaw was the first name on the list, and I remembered him eyeing me during several meetings. A founding member of the collective, he was the one to call. I gathered my things and went in search of a payphone. He insisted he wasn't asleep, but I knew I'd awaken him. "It's okay, really," he repeated in a husky smoker's voice. "I was planning on coming down anyway. I'll be there in an hour, tops." I could see from the membership list that he lived on 213th Street in the Inwood section of Manhattan. "But in the meantime," he added, "see if you can find some WD-40 lubricating oil. Any hardware store will have it." I couldn't find a store. That area was dead on the weekends. But true to his word, Chris arrived a little over an hour later and with a can of WD-40. Within minutes of spraying the dangling key, turned, and the door opened. "Listen, people are coming. Come on, I'll help you set up," he said, taking my hand, giving me no choice but to follow him inside. I've always liked tall men, maybe a throwback to my father, something about having to look up into a man's face, and Chris was tall with arms and legs that could wrap around you. Twice. Broad-shouldered but not muscular, with dark, thick hair that he constantly pushed behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He'd mastered the bohemian intellectual style. That day he was wearing a rust sweater vest over a striped green and white shirt, a forest green corduroy jacket, and a heavy dark brown twill pants. A long hand-knitted scarf encircled his neck. After the meeting, we flirted the afternoon away, sipping espresso and eating crusty sfogliatelle at the Café Borgia. Chris was a chain smoker with a pack of Camels always at the ready, and his fingertips were stained yellow. I was due uptown for a house meeting, but I didn't hesitate when he suggested a movie and dinner. "Great idea. I need to go inside for a minute and just make a call." I wasn't prepared to tell Chris about the group or Ollie for that matter, at least not right away. I shifted the truth around when I called and told Cynthia, one of my roommates, that I was still waiting for the locksmith. The lie was easily accepted, and I smiled to myself, hearing Annie's reproach in my head to such a phone call. Once we were outside, Chris took my hand, and we made our way through the crowded streets to Washington Square Park and then to 6th Avenue to Arturo's Pizza Restaurant. Over dinner, I explained about Reliable, District 65, and the strike. "I had to testify before the NLRB last week. It was very Twilight Zone-ish," I said. Then I took a hit from his cigarette. "You smoke?" "Sometimes, when I'm nervous." "Nothing to be nervous about," he said. "You know I have a crush on you, since that very first collective meeting." I smiled and asked, "What brought you to New York? You're from—" Vermont, right? Dimples magically appeared beneath his 5 o'clock shadow. Maine, actually. You'd like my family, he said with a straight face. My mother thinks canned ham and Wonder Bread are delicacies. Chris had left the University of Maine and the state 5 years before, but not before he'd confronted his father, an alcoholic whom he discovered had been physically abusing his mother. Chris threatened to expose him unless he moved out of the house and into the back room of their small family hardware store. With that in place, Chris felt free to leave home. He moved to Manhattan with his friend Toby Schick, and they began hanging out at the Marxist Center on Barrow Street. Within a month, Cecile Barlow, his first love and lead singer for a local Burlington band, made it to New York, CBGBs, and a record contract. He moved into her house in Long Beach, where she was living with a group of musicians. After 5 tumultuous years together, Cecile left him for the producer of the band's first album. The end of their relationship coincided with his disenchantment with Marxist dogma. He moved back to Manhattan and began the OU. And that's it, he said, tearing the wrapper off a fresh pack of Camels. Anyway, my father has found redemption in the church, and I've made peace with him. I make the 9-hour bus trip back to Maine twice a year, mostly to see my mother. She believes Richard Nixon was innocent. Godard's Masculine Feminine is showing at Bleecker Street Cinema. That's what I was planning on doing when you called. Chris lit another cigarette. You smoke too much, I said. We headed over to the theater. Godard's grainy black and white film told the story of a young Parisian woman and her unsettling relationship with a political radical, played by Jean-Pierre Léaud, a tall man with dark eyes who bore a striking resemblance to Chris. After the movie, we shared a joint as we walked towards the subway. Hey, you want a beer? He said, pulling me into McNulty's Irish pub on 6th Avenue. So, what did you think of the movie? He asked after we'd settled into a back booth and were sipping Budweisers. Léaud reminded me of you, but I'm sure you've been told that before. I lived in Paris during my junior year and people used to ask for my autograph, he said, laughing. This must be the 10th time I've seen Masculine Feminine. The first time we made love was without foreplay, fast and furious. The second time was in slow motion, and we finally fell asleep at daybreak. When we awoke, it was late afternoon. Over a huge meal of eggs and bacon and potatoes and juice and coffee, I told Chris about the group and Ollie. You should have left for good when that Annie person forced you out and refused to talk about it. What is this group? Stalinist Russia? He asked. Move in with me, Cora. You know I have a crush on you. I laughed. Well, that's sweet, but I can't change my life on a crush. You just said, and I quote, I don't plan on staying here forever, unquote. Now's your chance. Move in with me. It's more than a crush. I'm falling in love with you, and I think we'll be great together. You're falling in love with me in one day? And what about Ollie? It's not one day. I've been watching you at all the collective meetings. You're beautiful and you're smart. You don't give yourself enough credit in that department. And your politics are right. If you still want to see Ollie and he's okay with you living with me, I think maybe I can handle it. An open relationship? Dating other people? The freedom to if we want. But I don't see that happening for me for a long time anyway. I want to be with you. And I can see that you're ready to leave the group. It's too soon for me to make a decision like that, Chris. But ask me again sometime soon, okay? When I told Ollie about Chris, his response surprised me. Jesus fucking Christ, Cora, that guy? I could understand you fucking someone else, but not that guy. Fucking? You don't fucking even know him. I do. I have been to some of the collective meetings at the Open Union. He's a Marxist, an intellectual snob. I can't believe this shit. I thought you would have the good grace to accept this. I'm not asking for permission. You didn't consult me about Bernadette, and you know what? I would have told you she was lonely and needy, and saw you coming a mile away. That's not fair. What happened with Bernadette is different. I love her, but I'm in love with you. I don't even know what you mean by that. Sounds like a bullshit excuse they would say around here. I will love you forever, whether it's a romantic or platonic relationship. You're a child. You ruined us, and you should know. Chris has asked me to live with him, and I'm thinking about it. He hates the group. You're going to move in with him? If I'm going to leave the group, I need a place to go. I asked you to come with me to West Virginia, Ollie said, standing, moving slowly through his apartment, collecting every painting and every present I'd ever given him and pushing them into my arms. Here, I don't want them, and good luck. What the fuck? Are you throwing me out? What happened to the great anarchist? You're going to erase our relationship because I fucked someone you don't approve of? Your age is showing, Ollie. I can't deal with knowing you had sex with him in the bed we make love in. I fucked a lot of guys in that bed, and it never bothered you before. There was nothing but noisy confusion in my head when I left, wondering if my mind would ever catch up with my emotions. A few weeks later, I heard from Ken, my old union buddy, that Ollie was leaving the city to organize in West Virginia. It had been 3 months since that day in his apartment, and I couldn't let him leave New York without trying to speak to him one more time. The recording on his home phone informed me the number was no longer in service. And then I called the ILGWU offices, and Ollie was there, and he took my call. He'd come to cash his last paycheck. I'm leaving tomorrow, he said, and he agreed to meet me later that evening. It was raining lightly when I exited the subway, and by the time Ollie opened the door to his apartment, I was more than a little wet. He kissed me on the cheek and said, "Let me see if I can find you a towel somewhere in all this mess." He returned a few moments later and handed me a ragged dish towel. "Thanks for meeting me here. I left this last-minute packing, but it shouldn't take me long," he explained, tossing books into a box. "I'm going to drop this box off at the main post office on 34th Street in the morning, then head over to Port Authority." I sat on the chair near the stove, drying my hair, watching him move around the tiny kitchen with the grace of a lithesome rodeo cowboy. As usual, he was dressed in jeans, a denim work shirt, and his dark blue cap. I closed my eyes and listened to the rain against the window, and for an instant it was that wet summer's day in July when the picket line was washed out and we'd first made love, when after so many passionless couplings, an erotic collision of mind and body had allowed me to see the group clearly for the first time. The emotional alchemy of that day had brought me to this moment, and I'd been fighting that clarity ever since. The group had turned me against my mother, and now she was dead. "You look beautiful, Cora." I wiped the tears away as he watched me from across the room. "I was thinking of my mother, how I left her alone. I can't believe you were going to leave without calling me. I heard you were living with Chris." "Not yet. I've never stopped loving you, Ollie, but you wouldn't talk to me, and now you're leaving, and I won't see you again. You could still come with me. I love you too, sweetheart." Before I could say anything more, I was crying again. Remember how we raced the rain and made love, and in the process, pissing Annie off. You all have no idea what our relationship meant to me. I trusted you above all else, breaking the group's powerful hold on me. It felt like such a betrayal the way it played out before my eyes. I'm so sorry, Cora, terribly sorry. It was my fault. And with Chris, I acted like a child, but I just couldn't get myself in check to call you. He was standing near me, taking my hand, kissing my neck. Will you stay with me tonight? He whispered. I did, and in the morning we made love again, and we both promised to write, and then he was gone.